America discovers oil in Pennsylvania. Thousands of men rush in. They compete. They innovate. They play fair. John D. Rockefeller watches them and thinks, what idiots. Within 10 years, Rockefeller doesn't just win the oil business. He owns 90% of it. Not 90% of the market. 90% of all oil in America flows through one man's hands. How? Not through better oil. Not through smarter engineers, not through harder work, through warfare. Rockefeller didn't compete, he eliminated. This is the story of how one man turned business into a battlefield, built an invisible empire so powerful the government had to invent new laws just to stop him, and even when they broke his company into 34 pieces, he became richer than ever. It starts with a con man, a father who cheated his own children, and a boy who learned the only lesson that ever mattered: never trust anyone. July 8, 1839, Richford, New York. A boy is born into a lie. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, is not a doctor. He is not a respectable man. He is a traveling con man, a bigamist, a fraud, a ghost who disappears for months at a time, leaving his family with no money and no warning. William called himself Dr. William Rockefeller. He sold fake cancer cures from a wagon, pocketing cash from desperate, dying people. He had a secret second family, a whole other wife, other children that his first family knew nothing about. He would vanish for 6, 8, 12 months, no letter, no money, nothing. His wife Eliza held the family together through sheer willpower and religious faith. She rationed food, she kept the lights on, she kept her children alive while their father was off somewhere conning strangers and sleeping in another man's bed. And when William did come home, he didn't apologize, he didn't explain, he ran drills. He would make deals with young John, promise him money for chores, then change the terms at the last second, cheat him out of the payment, laugh when John got angry. His actual quote, recorded by people who knew him: "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make 'em sharp." Think about that for a moment. Imagine your own father sitting across the table from you, the one person who's supposed to be on your side, unconditionally, looking you in the eye and teaching you that betrayal is a lesson, that cheating is a gift, that trust is stupidity. That is the childhood of John D. Rockefeller. The wound never healed. It became a weapon. If you can't trust your own father, you can't trust anyone. And if you can't trust anyone, you have only one defense: own everything. Control everything. Leave nothing to chance. Leave nothing in someone else's hands. John D. Rockefeller didn't grow up wanting to be rich. He grew up wanting to be untouchable. By age 7, John Rockefeller was already running a business. He raised turkeys, sold them to neighbors, kept meticulous written records of every transaction, every penny in, every penny out. While other boys played, John tracked his margins. By his early teens, he was lending money to neighbors at 7% interest. As a child, in a rural town in New York, most adults didn't understand compound interest. This kid was charging it. He wrote in his diary, "I was trained from the beginning to work, to save, and to give." But the save part became something darker than discipline. It became obsession. Accumulate, never spend unnecessarily. Every dollar is a soldier. Send it out, bring more back. Never let the pile shrink. At 16, he got his first real job, bookkeeper for a small firm, $4 a week, about $130 today. He was meticulous, tireless, invisible. One day, he found a 50-cent discrepancy buried in hundreds of pages of ledgers. He stayed all night to find it. His boss was impressed. John was not satisfied. He sat at that desk, surrounded by someone else's numbers, tracking someone else's money, making someone else rich, and he thought, never again. The pattern was set. The philosophy was crystallizing. Control everything. Trust nothing. Own. Don't work. He wasn't going to be an employee. He was going to be the man employees worked for. He wasn't going to track someone else's fortune. He was going to build his own. and he was going to protect it like a fortress because he had learned from his own father at his own kitchen table that the moment you let your guard down, someone will steal everything. In 1859, a man named Edwin Drake drilled into the ground in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and the world changed overnight. Oil came gushing out of the earth in quantities no one had imagined. This wasn't just fuel, this was the future. Whale oil had been lighting American homes for decades, but whales were getting harder to find and expensive to hunt. Petroleum was everywhere, it was cheap, and it burned clean. The gold rush had been about gold. This was about black gold, and it was bigger. Thousands of men flooded into Pennsylvania oil fields. Drillers, speculators, gamblers, dreamers. They dug wells side by side. They competed furiously. They drove prices through the floor. Oil went from $10 a barrel to 10 cents a barrel as supply exploded. Fortunes were made and destroyed in weeks. It was chaos. John D. Rockefeller was 20 years old. He looked at this chaos and saw something no one else was seeing. Everyone was racing to find more oil, more supply, more wells. Rockefeller stood back, watched the carnage, and thought, the money isn't in finding oil, it's in controlling it. Think of it like water. Imagine 1,000 people drilling wells in your neighborhood. Suddenly there's water everywhere. The price of water collapses. Everyone who drilled a well is going broke. But what if you owned the pipes, the filtration plant, the delivery trucks, the storage tanks? The water still has to get from the ground to someone's glass. And if you own everything between those 2 points, it doesn't matter who drills the well. They have to come through you. That was Rockefeller's insight at age 20. Not the oil, the pipeline, the refinery, the distribution. Control the movement of oil, and you control the oil itself. By age 24, Rockefeller was ready to move. He started his first oil refinery in Cleveland, Ohio, with a partner named Maurice Clark. Why Cleveland? Not because it was near the oil fields, because it was a transportation hub, railroads running in every direction, plus Great Lakes shipping to the north. Double the routes to market, double the leverage. Rockefeller was already thinking in terms of control, not production. He wasn't going to be near the chaos of the oil fields. He was going to sit at the intersection point, the choke point, and make everyone pass through him. The refinery thrived almost immediately. Oil demand was exploding. The Civil War was burning through kerosene at industrial scale. Money was coming in fast. But Rockefeller had a partner, and partners meant shared control, shared decisions, shared power. That was not acceptable. In 1865, 2 years after they started, Rockefeller forced a buyout. He and Clark held an auction for sole ownership of the refinery. Clark bid. Rockefeller bid higher. Clark bid again. Rockefeller matched and exceeded again and again, showing no emotion, revealing no ceiling, no limit. Clark finally gave up. He sold for $72,500, roughly $1.3 million today. The moment Clark walked out the door, something happened inside John D. Rockefeller. He felt it, and he would never unfeel it. Total control, total ownership, no partners, no one to answer to, no one who could vote against him or slow him down or change terms on him the way his father used to. He was 26 years old. He owned Cleveland's largest oil refinery, and the addiction had begun. Over the next few years, something hardened inside John D. Rockefeller that can only be called a worldview, not a strategy, a religion. He said it himself, directly, shockingly, in words he never took back. Competition is a sin. That's not a metaphor. That's not a negotiating position. That is what John D. Rockefeller genuinely believed. In his mind, the free market, the thing America celebrated as its great engine of innovation and opportunity, was chaos, waste, inefficiency. Hundreds of refiners competing, driving prices down, building redundant facilities, burning resources, going bankrupt, destroying wealth. His vision was different. One company, perfect efficiency, total control. One refinery system, ruthlessly optimized. No redundancy, no competition, no waste. He saw himself not as a predator, but as an architect, bringing order to disorder, imposing rationality on a chaotic industry. And here's the unsettling part. He wasn't entirely wrong about the efficiency argument. We'll come back to that. But the method he chose to build his rational empire was not rational, it was ruthless. He studied the railroads. They were the key, the choke point of the entire industry. Oil in Pennsylvania was worthless until it reached the refineries. Refined oil was worthless until it reached customers. Everything traveled by rail. Control the shipping rates, and you control the economics of every competitor in the business. And John D. Rockefeller began, quietly, methodically, with the patience of a man who had been waiting his entire life for this moment, to set a trap. By 1870, John D. Rockefeller is 31 years old. He owns one refinery in Cleveland. There are hundreds of refiners across America. He is just one of many. But he has already learned 3 lessons his competitors haven't. 1. Trust no one. 2. Competition is waste. 3. The real power isn't in making oil. It's in controlling who can sell it. In the next 10 years, he will use these lessons to wage the most ruthless campaign of business warfare in American history. Competitors who refuse to surrender won't just lose, they will be systematically annihilated. This is where John D. Rockefeller stops playing business and starts waging war. January 10th, 1870. Rockefeller and his partners incorporate the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, $1 million in capital, about $22 million today. Rockefeller holds the largest stake, 27%. The name was chosen carefully. Standard implies a quality benchmark, consistent, reliable, trustworthy. It's a name that says we are the normal, we are the baseline. What it really meant, we intend to be the only one. Standard Oil controls roughly 10% of American oil refining at launch, a significant player, but there are dozens of competitors in every major city: Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore. To outsiders, Standard Oil looks like one competitor among many. To Rockefeller, it is the launch vehicle for total domination. The plan is already in motion, the trap is already being built, and the first spring is about to be set. In 1871, John D. Rockefeller executed what may be the single most ruthless business maneuver in American history. He went to the railroads. The major railroad companies had a problem. Oil shipments were unpredictable. Drillers shipped when prices were high, stopped when they crashed. The railroads couldn't plan, couldn't fill their cars, couldn't guarantee revenue. Rockefeller offered them a deal. I'll guarantee you massive, consistent volume. You give me a secret discount. The railroads said yes. Standard Oil's competitors would pay the public rate, let's say $2.56 per barrel to ship oil. Rockefeller would pay $1.06 per barrel, half price, a massive hidden advantage. But that's not the evil part. The evil part is what happened next. Part of what every competitor paid, that $2.56 per barrel, would be secretly paid back to Rockefeller as a rebate. Read that again. Rockefeller's competitors were not just paying more to ship their oil, they were funding his war chest. Every barrel they shipped, a portion of their payment went directly into Rockefeller's pocket. They were unknowingly paying him to destroy them. Think of it this way. Imagine you and your friend are both selling lemonade on the same street. You both pay $1 to use the street corner, but the city secretly gives you 0.50 of your friend's dollar. Every cup of lemonade he sells makes you richer, and he has absolutely no idea it's happening. This was called the South Improvement Company, and when it leaked to the public, when independent oil producers in Pennsylvania discovered what Rockefeller had arranged, the outrage was volcanic. They called it the Oil War. Drillers dumped Standard Oil. Producers refused to sell to him. Newspapers screamed. The scheme was dismantled within weeks under public pressure. But the damage was already done. In the brief window before exposure, Rockefeller had used his cost advantage to crush dozens of competitors, and he learned something far more valuable than any single deal. Public schemes fail. The next one goes invisible. Cleveland, Ohio. There are 26 oil refineries in the city. Rockefeller owns one. He is about to own 25. His new method is elegant in its simplicity. No grand schemes, no complex arrangements, just Rockefeller himself showing up, sitting down across from each competitor, and delivering a choice so clear, so cold, so final that most men simply gave up on the spot. The pitch was always the same. I know exactly what your costs are. I know what you owe the bank. I know your shipping rates. I know your margins. I have advantages you cannot match. Railroad discounts, capital reserves, scale you will never reach. You can sell to me today at a fair price. Or you can refuse, and I will drop oil prices below what it costs either of us to produce. I can survive that. Can you? He wasn't bluffing. He showed them the numbers, their numbers, private financial data he had no business having, but Standard Oil had informants everywhere, bookkeepers, railroad clerks, suppliers who quietly reported back. Think about what it felt like to sit across from this man. You built your refinery from scratch, you worked for years, and here is John D. Rockefeller telling you your own financial situation in detail, demonstrating that he already knows every weakness, every vulnerability, and giving you one choice. Most sold within weeks. By the end of 1872, Rockefeller controlled 25 of 26 Cleveland refineries. The ones who refused, he did exactly what he promised. He dropped prices, he operated at a loss for months. Standard Oil was large enough to absorb the bleeding. The independents were not. They went bankrupt, and Rockefeller bought their equipment for pennies on the dollar. One city, 1 year, 25 refineries absorbed. The playbook was proven. It had 3 steps: offer, threaten, execute. Cleveland was not enough. It was never going to be enough. Rockefeller replicated the Cleveland playbook in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, every major refining city in America, one by one, systematically absorbed. But he had learned from the South Improvement Company disaster. Visibility was dangerous. The moment people could see what was happening, they could organize against it. So he disappeared. Standard Oil began using intermediary buyers, fake companies, frontmen, agents who approached competitors with offers and never mentioned Rockefeller's name. Sellers often didn't know they were selling to Standard Oil until the paperwork was signed. He also created fake competing companies, businesses that looked independent, had different names, different offices, different letterheads, but all of them were Standard Oil. All of them were Rockefeller. The market appeared to have competition. It didn't. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of American oil refining. Not 90% of one city, the entire country. 9 out of every 10 barrels of oil refined in the United States passed through Rockefeller's hands, and almost no one could see it because officially it was hundreds of different companies. The invisible hand was not a metaphor, it was a man. Controlling refining was not enough. It was never going to be enough. Rockefeller looked at his empire and identified every place where he was still dependent on someone else. Every vendor, every supplier, every middleman who touched his product between the oil well and the customer's lamp. Each one was a vulnerability. Each one had to be eliminated. He built pipelines from the Pennsylvania oil fields directly to his refineries, cutting out independent transporters who might charge higher rates or, worse, work with competitors. He bought railroads outright, not just favorable rates, ownership, total control over the track. He built his own barrel manufacturing plants. Competitors paid $2.50 per barrel. Rockefeller manufactured his own for 96 cents. He owned sulfuric acid plants, a key chemical in oil refining. He owned tank cars, delivery wagons, storage facilities. Eventually, he owned the gas stations where the final product was sold. Think about what this means for a competitor trying to survive. An independent refiner has to buy barrels from a supplier. They pay $2.56. Rockefeller pays 96 cents. The independent ships on railroads. They pay full rate. Rockefeller owns the railroad. The independent buys chemicals. They pay market price. Rockefeller owns the chemical plant. By the time oil reached a customer, an independent refiner was paying 50 cents per gallon to produce. Rockefeller paid 24 cents. How do you compete against someone whose cost structure is half yours? You don't. You sell or you die. There was no third option. By 1880, John D. Rockefeller is 41 years old. He controls 90% of America's oil, not through better products, not through innovation, through warfare. Systematic, calculated, ruthless. He offered every competitor the same choice: surrender or be destroyed. Most surrendered. Those who fought were annihilated. But Rockefeller has a problem now. The more he grows, the more visible he becomes, and visibility is vulnerability. So he builds something the world has never seen: a ghost, a company so complex, so hidden, so spread across hundreds of entities that no one can see the hand that controls it all. Until someone leaks the truth, and the empire begins to crack. In 1882, Rockefeller's lawyers invented something new. They called it the trust. Here was the problem. Standard Oil was an Ohio corporation. Under existing law, it couldn't directly own companies in other states. But Rockefeller controlled dozens of companies across the country. Legally, this was messy, challengeable, visible. The trust solved everything. The structure worked like this. Shareholders of all 41 controlled companies surrendered their certificates and received trust certificates in return. Those certificates were managed by 9 trustees, all loyal to Rockefeller, with Rockefeller himself at the head. Technically, each company remained independent. New Jersey companies, Ohio companies, Pennsylvania companies, all separate legal entities. Actually, 9 men in a room made every decision for all of them. Think of it like this. Imagine 100 piggy banks in 100 different rooms. Each one looks independent. Each one has its own lock. But one man holds the master key that opens every single one. He doesn't own the piggy banks on paper. He just controls them absolutely. No one owned Standard Oil. The trust owned everything. Rockefeller owned the trust. Therefore, Rockefeller owned everything. First corporate trust in American history. Within years, the entire country would be using the same structure: the steel trust, the sugar trust, the tobacco trust. The age of American monopoly was born in Rockefeller's law office in 1882. The public still saw hundreds of independent oil companies. In reality, 9 men controlled 90% of America's oil and 85% of its final sales. The ghost was complete. By the 1890s, Standard Oil was not a company. It was a nation-state without borders. Over 100,000 barrels of oil processed every single day. 20,000 oil wells, 4,000 miles of pipeline, enough to stretch from New York to Los Angeles and back. 5,000 tank cars, 100,000 employees. Standard Oil controlled not just American oil, but significant portions of the market in Europe and Asia. Rockefeller's personal wealth exceeded $1 billion at a time when the average American worker earned $400 a year. Adjusted for inflation, Rockefeller's peak wealth was approximately $400 billion in today's money, richer than Jeff Bezos, richer than Elon Musk, richer than any individual human being in the modern era. He could move oil prices up or down across the entire country by will. If he decided prices go up on Tuesday, prices went up on Tuesday. Everywhere, no exceptions. Politicians feared him. Standard Oil donated to both parties, ensuring friends in every administration. Journalists who wrote unfavorable stories mysteriously found that their newspapers lost advertising revenue. Publishers received quiet suggestions that certain topics were better left alone. The power was absolute, not loud, not theatrical, invisible and absolute, which is the most terrifying kind. Here is the part that defies every expectation. The richest man in the world lived like a monk. Same house, same routine, same church every Sunday without exception. He tithed 10% of his income to his Baptist congregation, a habit he had kept since his first $4 a week job as a 16-year-old bookkeeper. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't throw lavish parties or build absurd palaces or race yachts against other billionaires. He ate simple food, he went to bed early, he worked 12-hour days well into his 70s. He read expense reports, he tracked minor costs personally. He fired employees for small infractions. A single moment of disloyalty was enough. He had almost no real friends. How could he? His father had taught him what friendship costs. Every relationship was a potential betrayal. He trusted almost no one, worked constantly, and lived in genuine fear of public opinion, of anarchists who threatened his life, of kidnappers targeting his family. The richest man alive was also, by most accounts, the loneliest. The lesson his father taught him in a kitchen in rural New York had followed him into every room of his life. He had money beyond imagining, power beyond precedent, and almost no one he could actually trust. He had won, and it had cost him everything that wasn't in a ledger. Here is the uncomfortable truth about John D. Rockefeller that his critics never wanted to admit. He genuinely believed he was making the world better. Not as a cover story, not as propaganda, he actually believed it. He looked at the chaotic oil market of the 1960s, prices swinging wildly, refineries going bankrupt, resources wasted on redundant facilities, quality inconsistent, and he saw himself as the man who brought order, efficiency, consistency. He said the day of individual competition is gone. And by many measures, he was right. Standard Oil did lower the price of kerosene significantly. The chaos of unregulated competition had produced wildly volatile prices that hurt ordinary consumers. Rockefeller's ruthless efficiency produced a cheaper, more consistent product. He cut waste, he improved refining technology, he standardized quality. The problem was not the efficiency. The problem was what happened to everything outside his control. The innovation that never happened because competitors were destroyed before they could try. The alternatives that were never developed because one man controlled access to market. The political corruption, the concentrated power. Rockefeller saw himself as a hero bringing order to chaos. The rest of America was beginning to see something else entirely. A tyrant. And a journalist whose father he had destroyed was about to prove it. By 1890, John D. Rockefeller has achieved what no human being in history has achieved. He controls 90% of an essential resource. He is richer than kings, more powerful than presidents. His empire is invisible, spread across hundreds of entities, buried in trusts and holding companies. No court has been able to prove he controls it all. But someone is about to prove it. A journalist named Ida Tarbell will spend years inside Standard Oil's history. She will read every document, interview every survivor, trace every secret deal, and she will publish it all. The ghost that Rockefeller built in shadows will be dragged, screaming, into the light. The empire that took 40 years to build will shatter within less than 10. Because Rockefeller forgot one lesson. You can't control everything. Eventually, the truth leaks. Her name was Ida Tarbell, and she had a personal reason to hate Standard Oil. Her father, Franklin Tarbell, had been an independent oil producer in Pennsylvania, a small operator, a man who built his business with his own hands and played by the rules. Standard Oil destroyed him, not through a fair fight, through the South Improvement Company scheme, the secret railroad rebates that made it impossible for independent producers to survive. Her father watched men he knew go bankrupt, watched the industry he had helped build get swallowed by a machine none of them could see or fight. Ida Tarbell never forgot. In 1902, she began publishing The History of Standard Oil in McClure's Magazine, the most widely read publication in America. It ran in 19 installments over 2 years, a slow, methodical, devastatingly sourced investigation that read like a criminal indictment. She exposed everything. The South Improvement Company in full detail, the Cleveland Massacre, the railroad rebates, the fake competing companies, the predatory pricing, the informant networks inside competitors, the political corruption. She had documents, Rockefeller's own letters, court records, sworn testimony from men who had been in the room when deals were made. The public reaction was unlike anything America had seen. Rockefeller went almost overnight from respected industrialist, a man who gave generously to churches and universities, to the most hated man in America. He was burned in effigy. Newspapers nationwide demanded action. Rockefeller refused to respond. He stayed silent. He had always believed that silence was power, that explaining yourself was admitting vulnerability. But silence could not stop what was coming. The government had not been idle. In 1900, Congress had passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, landmark legislation that made it illegal to create monopolies or restrain trade. Standard Oil had been a primary inspiration for the law, though it wasn't targeted directly at the time. After Tarbell's expose ignited national outrage, the government finally moved. In 1906, the federal government filed suit against Standard Oil. The charges: illegal monopoly, restraint of trade, criminal conspiracy. The trial lasted 4 years, thousands of pages of testimony, hundreds of witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming, much of it from Standard Oil's own internal documents, the letters and memos that Rockefeller's obsessive record-keeping had preserved in devastating detail. His own words, his own numbers, his own instructions to subordinates, all of it laid before the court. In 1909, the federal court found Standard Oil guilty. Rockefeller appealed. The case went to the Supreme Court. On May 15, 1911, the Supreme Court of the United States issued its ruling. Standard Oil was to be broken up into 34 separate, independent companies, the largest corporate dissolution in American history. The ghost had been named, dragged into court, found guilty, and sentenced to death. Standard Oil was cut into 34 pieces like a butcher breaking down a carcass. Some of the pieces you know. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil, later merged with Exxon to form ExxonMobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco, later absorbed by BP. Standard Oil of Ohio became Sohio, also absorbed by BP. Continental Oil became Conoco. Atlantic became Arco. Look at that list. Those are not historical artifacts. Those are the companies that run the world's oil supply today. The corporations that sit at the center of global energy markets, that influence governments, that shape foreign policy, they are Rockefeller's children. The government broke up Standard Oil to end a monopoly. It accidentally created the modern oil industry. The irony is almost too much. And now the final twist, the one that defies every expectation, the one that says everything about how power really works. When Standard Oil was broken up, John D. Rockefeller owned shares in the trust. When the trust was dissolved into 34 companies, he received proportional shares in all 34 of them. 34 separate companies, all now competing with each other instead of artificially cooperating under Rockefeller's direction. Competition, the thing he had spent 40 years trying to eliminate, was suddenly driving each of his 34 companies to become more efficient, more valuable. The stocks soared. Before the breakup, Rockefeller's personal worth was estimated at approximately $900 million. Within a few years of the dissolution, as all 34 companies competed and grew and their stocks multiplied, his net worth exceeded $1.4 billion. He became the first American billionaire. The government broke up Standard Oil to end a monopoly. They had humiliated him publicly. They had dragged his name through years of headlines. And they had made him richer than he had ever been. The most ruthless man in American business had just gotten the last laugh from his front porch in retirement, having never spoken a word in his own defense. In his later years, John D. Rockefeller became something unexpected, the greatest philanthropist in American history. He had always given to his church, but in retirement he went further, much further. He funded the University of Chicago, one of the great research universities in the world. He created the Rockefeller Foundation, which funded public health campaigns that essentially eradicated hookworm across the American South, a parasitic disease that had been sapping the energy and intelligence of millions of children. He funded research that dramatically reduced the spread of yellow fever. Over his lifetime, Rockefeller gave away more than $540 million, over $14 billion in today's money. He applied his business philosophy to charity with the same ruthless efficiency. Research the problem, identify the intervention with maximum leverage, fund it systematically, measure the results. His philanthropic organizations created models for modern charity that still guide foundations today. Was it redemption? Was he buying his way out of history's judgment? Or did he genuinely believe, as he always had, that he was a steward of wealth, obligated by his faith to put it to work for God's purposes? Probably all three. The human mind is capable of holding all of that simultaneously. He died on May 23, 1937. He was 97 years old, outliving nearly every enemy, every rival, every journalist who had written against him. His last recorded words, "God will take care of the widow and orphan." He outlived Standard Oil. He outlived the age that made him. He had been born before the Civil War and died during the New Deal. He had seen oil go from a curiosity in Pennsylvania to the fuel of a global civilization, and he had built the machine that moved it all. What do we do with John D. Rockefeller? What he built? The template for corporate monopoly, the playbook for vertical integration, the structure of modern philanthropy, the infrastructure of the American oil industry, and therefore the infrastructure of the modern world. The companies that still refine and distribute a significant portion of global energy. What he destroyed? Thousands of independent businesses, families like Ida Tarbell's fathers that built something real and had it taken, free market competition in an essential industry, public trust in corporations which never quite recovered. The idea that the American dream was accessible to anyone willing to work hard, because working hard, it turned out, was no match for the man who controlled the railroad rates. Did he do more good or harm? The question doesn't have a clean answer. Standard Oil did bring lower prices. It did improve quality. It did bring order to a genuinely chaotic industry that was destroying itself. But it also killed the alternatives before they could be tried. It corrupted government at every level. It concentrated wealth and power in ways that reshaped American democracy. Both things are true at the same time in the same life. And now the part that should disturb you most, because it isn't history, it's right now. The tactics Rockefeller pioneered, vertical integration, predatory pricing, corporate trusts, hidden monopolies, controlling the infrastructure everyone must use, did not die with Standard Oil. They are the foundational strategies of the most powerful companies in the world today. Amazon controls the store, the shipping, the warehouse, the cloud, the payment system, and increasingly the brands that sell through it, just like Rockefeller controlled the oil, the pipelines, the railroads, the barrels, the refineries, and the distribution. Google controls the search, the advertising, the browser, the phone operating system, and the map you use to navigate, just like Rockefeller controls every point in the oil supply chain. The playbook didn't die. It was studied, refined, applied to information instead of oil. History is not repeating. History never stopped. A 31-year-old man with one oil refinery decides that competition is a sin. That man controls 90% of America's oil. The government breaks up his monopoly into 34 pieces. He becomes richer than ever. John D. Rockefeller learned not to trust anyone from a con man father who cheated his own sons at the kitchen table. He learned to wage war, not compete, offering surrender or annihilation and meaning every word. He learned to build an empire in shadows where no one could see the puppet master pulling the strings. And when the empire shattered, when journalists exposed him, when the Supreme Court broke Standard Oil into 34 pieces, he learned the final lesson. You don't have to control everything to win. You just need to own the pieces. Rockefeller died the richest man in modern history. His $1.4 billion in 1937 equals nearly $400 billion today. Richer than Bezos, richer than Elon, richer than any human being who has lived since. The companies he built still pump oil and refine fuel and influence governments. ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, the big oil empires that shape global politics are Rockefeller's children. The tactics he invented are in every business school, in every startup pitch, in every strategy meeting at every tech giant that is right now trying to control the infrastructure everyone else depends on. So did Rockefeller win? Did we all lose? The answer, the honest, uncomfortable, terrifying answer, is both. Standard Oil brought efficiency. It also crushed competition. Rockefeller gave away billions. He also destroyed thousands of livelihoods. He was both villain and visionary, both tyrant and philanthropist. He was the monster the free market made, the one they couldn't stop, and the one they ultimately couldn't contain. And maybe that's the actual lesson. The line between genius and monster isn't clear. The difference between building an empire and destroying an industry is just perspective. The same ruthlessness that built something lasting also left wreckage that lasted just as long. John D. Rockefeller proved something that should terrify every generation that inherits his world. If you're ruthless enough, patient enough, and willing to trust no one, you can own the world. The question isn't whether someone can do it. The question is whether we'll recognize it happening. The government said no in 1911. Look around. History is repeating.